Everyone, you're just stuck with me today, so much more boring, a boring one, but hopefully you all can make it on Monday. We have a what's that? Uh-oh. Oh yeah, that's fair enough. Fair enough. You should right. Fair enough. Fair enough. Monday we will have a very a large group, and it hopefully will be a very good gathering of our women senators in celebration of Women's History Month, with a number of other things that are going to be happening next week. I think that are really worth celebrating. So hopefully today will tide us over until Monday. Certainly over the course of the session, you've heard from a number of our committee chairs and throughout leadership of where we have been, and we're now through week 11. And I'm really proud of the progress that we've made so far. When we started, very clearly said it over and over again that we were focused on growth, affordability, and protecting Marylanders against this Trump administration. The legislation that we've passed this session, I believe, has made strong progress towards that goal. Now we just have to get to the bottom line and finish with the House on a number of these key items. The budget will remain the most impactful legislation that we produce. It's our one constitutional duty, and we're very close. In fact, as many of you all saw, the budget committees met early today as a pre-conference measure on some of the outstanding items where there were differences, and I finished within the hour. So it's a sign that I think hopefully we will be close to done with the budget by the end of today. It'll be the fastest I have seen us pass and agree upon a budget and send to the governor in my tenure here as a presiding officer. With that, we will work collaboratively as well on the other most important issue, which is finding a way to navigate through and pass this energy package that is absolutely critical for Marylanders. We know the strain that Marylanders are facing, and that right now, we are at a place where it's looking like $138 million will be directly attributable to electric customers across the state. That is an increase from the 100, so we're identifying a few additional pieces of funding to allocate towards direct relief. So we're still at least $150 on annual budget bills for utility bills. However, I think this is really important. We're now in agreement that there is $280 million that's going to be allocated to the Office of Home Energy Programs to assist low-income households on their energy bills and arrearages. What this practically means is that for income-eligible individuals, they will see savings of up to $1,400 annually, $1,400 annually for low-income Marylanders to access this $280 million worth of utility bill relief. The overarching goal of the energy package is to maximize savings while also recognizing the practical and political realities that we face with energy markets. We're going to continue to do the short-term things that are possible and focus on the medium and long-term approach to stabilize our energy market here in Maryland. We also have to make sure that we have real accountability for responsible investment by our utilities around transmission and as economic growth continues. To date, we passed 267 bills over to the House of Delegates. They reflected a high level of productivity and a diverse amount of work from the Senate that we hope that the House will take up. I do want to note as a feature here, we have a record number of bills from the House that were not cross-filed. So this is a new dynamic, as the Senate has had bill limits, that we have the highest number of non-cross-filed bills that we've ever had. This is going to prove to be a bit of a challenge because this means that there are a number of bills that have not had a Senate hearing. That makes it very difficult to make sure that the Senate has its full review, and so that will be a feature of the final 2 weeks here that I think we're going to have to navigate with our partners in the House. It's very difficult to pass a number of bills that did not have cross-files, so we'll do the best we can, but we owe it to Marylanders to make sure that they get a full and robust hearing before we can take action on them. The other issues that I just want to flag that will be kind of out there that are maybe not headline issues, but we're really working hard on our economic development package and providing additional economic development tools. I am most interested in sort of the downtown Baltimore and regional impact in Baltimore, but we know that that's not just where this matters. On the Eastern Shore in Cambridge, in Western Maryland with the Luke Paper Mill site, in Montgomery County with around a number of the metro stops and the Sphere and what's happening in National Harbor in Prince George's County, Southern Maryland with the development around the bases. There's an opportunity to look at different financing tools that may be available for larger investment projects. And so so we're working with our partners in the House and our Economic Development and Finance Committee to navigate some additional tools for these particular policies. We're also focusing on healthcare stabilization. We are in a period of transition as the state has signed a new AHEAD agreement that allows for transition of the all-payer model into a new feature where we will no longer necessarily have a fully all-payer system. Medicare will be transitioning back to the federal government for rate setting. And so that is going to have a major impact on the future of Maryland healthcare. Hospitals are facing enormous strain and financial pressures with that level of uncertainty that they're trying to navigate. And so there are a number of bills around staffing, around how the HSCRC will function that may not be get a lot of attention, but they are incredibly important over the next 5 to 10 years as to how our hospital system and our healthcare marketplace will function. Last things I want to note are education accountability and policies around investments in education. I was very pleased to see that the House moved forward a bill around accountability to enhance accountability that is reasonable and thoughtful and balanced for public schools. This was a negotiated bill with MSDE and a lot of our labor partners, and I'm pleased to see that there was movement. This was one of those bills that did not have a Senate crossfile, but I look forward to moving it through the Senate to make sure once it gets here, even though it's a little bit late, we want to make sure that we get that done because it's incredibly important that money is spent well and that we're getting results for the higher investments that we've made. So at the end of the day, we're in an excellent position to spend the next 2 weeks really finalizing these core issues. And we've built great momentum and worked very well with our partners in the House. It's been an excellent opportunity to work with the new Speaker. I think we've been in greater communication than I've ever experienced. And so we are navigating these difficult issues as well as possible. So with that, let me open up.
Actually, I wanted to start with the energy issue. And we have been talking a lot about what we have done sort of in the last year and this year in terms of rates and doing these short-term fixes. But long-term, clearly we're going to be back at this next year looking at rates again. What's sort of the Senate or globally the General Assembly doing now to sort of set up that conversation for 2027 and 2028? Because we're clearly going to be back doing that again.
Yeah, so I would say there was some interesting news that just came out yesterday, which was very interesting. I think is not in Maryland, but has a huge impact on what's happening in our energy markets overall. Constellation just announced that 3 Mile Island, which is a nuclear facility that they had a partnership with Microsoft, is not going to be able to be connected to the PJM grid until I believe it was 2030 or 2031. They are able to spin the reactors up again and produce energy by 2027, but they can't get onto the grid until 2031. I say this because this is not in Maryland, but has an enormous impact on Maryland ratepayers. We are dealing with an energy market that is in flux, and in some cases with PJM, there is news that it's in a bit of a crisis. The PJM grid has not appropriately forecasted and planned for the level of investment and generation that's needed to keep up with the modern economy. And so that is the context in which Maryland is operating. I say that because we have a number of levers, but we don't have all of the levers to be able to deal with the energy supply crisis that we're dealing with. So we do have to do short-term fixes. We do have to adjust Empower and put $138 million towards single-year changes and cost containment. But we have to get more generation here in Maryland and on the grid overall. That means PJM has got to improve its systems and policies, and we have to expedite with permitting and regulatory frameworks so that we can get cleaner energy here in Maryland. In some cases, that's going to be natural gas because it is cleaner than the coal facilities that we know Maryland has relied on for too long. But we have to transition to cleaner. That's natural gas, that's battery plus solar. We need an all of the above that is cleaner strategy.
Follow up on that, there was a bill in the House and the Senate that I don't believe made it out of committee in either, but it was going to just look into, basically study what it would be like if Maryland left the PJM. There's been a lot of talks about other states within the PJM talking about if it would be worth leaving. Curious if you kind of have explored that at all, have a stance on it, what you think?
Yeah, it's just not a realistic option. We are a state that imports energy, which is not inherently a bad thing. We need to generate more, but we need a balanced approach. Maryland is an expensive state in which to generate energy, and so there are places on the 13-state grid that you can spin up generation faster and more affordably. And so we should want that. We want generation to happen in other places so long as we have the transmission to bring it here in a way that's more affordable than what we would be generating on our own. And so there is no world, I think, where we leave PJM in the other 13 states. It's just not a viable option for the state of Maryland. What we need is to use the tools that we have to force PJM to be better.
I don't wanna belabor it, but I guess like if you were to leave if Pennsylvania committed to also leaving, or maybe it's like some other exporter states, do you think there's like any more of a conversation there? Do you really feel like being in the PJM is the best place?
You know, look, a mini compact of Virginia, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, it would take a lot of analysis. It's very hard for me to see it being viable given the amount that we rely on Ohio and some of the other states to balance the load. And so it's hard for me to see that it would end up being a net more affordable option. What we need to see is where generation can come online, it needs to get onto the grid faster at a utility scale. And I think that's the big thing that I am most concerned about, is that PJM has been in a place of stable prices, had a massive spike 2 years ago that we're all scrambling from, and we have to be a lot more nimble and entrepreneurial in figuring out how to get generation onto the grid faster to lower prices.
Mr. President, I wanted to ask you about the Senate's version of the energy bill discussed in committee yesterday during a work session. Specifically wanted to ask you about some of the differences, some of which we discussed on Tuesday, but including specifically turning the forecasted test years into more of a PSC evaluation rather than banning them at this point. I also saw some changes that I wanted to ask you about on utility performance incentives being added into. I was wondering if you could comment on those two changes as well as any others you'd like to highlight.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we have done in the state of Maryland, as many other states have, is taken the expertise of day-to-day regulatory functions for our utility markets and put it into the Public Service Commission. They have the knowledge, the expertise, the understanding of, and the ability to pull in by court order certain information from utilities to make decisions that are in the best interests of ratepayers. And so my general take, and I think that that's the case of what I heard from committee members as well, is that the PSC has the expertise at a day-to-day level to really have the tools to know what is in the best interest of ratepayers in an open format, in a proceeding that is open to the public. That's where I think there's a little bit of a difference with historic years versus forecasted test years. I think there's a perception of, do we want to know where the utilities are forecasting their investments? My belief is that we do. We want to know where their intended investments are, and then we want to be able to evaluate whether they are the best cost and most necessary for the moment. That is more difficult to do when you don't have a forecast option available. And so this is where I think the Senate has asked the PSC, we want you to dive into this and evaluate it. What is better for ratepayers? Is it better to just have a historic standard, or is it better to get data on the front end and more transparent process of what investments are planned for the future? And we think that the PSC is best suited to really make that final decision because they have the tools available to get into the weeds of what the long-term implications are. We know we have upgrades to do. We know our electric system, our infrastructure is old. We see it with gas and with electric. We need the right policies that are based on the right factual data, not just because it feels one way or another, but that the data suggests that it's actually better for ratepayers. And so that's where we're deferring some of these decisions to those who have the ability to use the tools to get the data to make the best decision.
And on the performance incentives that
Oh yeah, I think one of the things that we believe that we have not done effectively is provided the right incentives to the PSC and provided them the tools to put incentives in the system. So one of the things that we've seen from other states is sort of in a profit sharing arrangement where there is an ability to incentivize a reduction in costs that the state shares in those lower costs, or ratepayers share, the public and those who pay into the system share. It's not just profits for the bottom line for the corporate entity. It's shared savings across ratepayers and the corporate entity. And so we want to adopt some of those ideas that are being utilized in places like New York and Ohio that are effective at setting up the right incentives to reduce costs.
Mr. President, after session, if you could imagine yourself sitting down at a kitchen table with some of your constituents who have been hit with some higher costs, energy-wise and other, Other than the two buckets you explained at the top, what are some of the ways you can explain to them that the General Assembly made their lives easier and for their, specifically for their wallets?
Well, I would say, first and foremost, I would say I'm feeling it myself, and I feel incredibly frustrated. When I have my wife talk about our lives with our two kids, everything feels more expensive, everything feels like too much. And when I really boil down to how did we get to this place, I look at a federal government that has radically misled people as to the function of what their purpose has been. Take it from this war in Iran that is gouging gas prices to over $4 a gallon. This is hitting people where they can't afford it. And there are very few tools that the state has to stop a global war that was done indiscriminately. When we look at our energy prices, we know that the federal administration, the federal Republicans in the summer, ended up passing a bill that decimated the generation of renewable, cleaner energy because of the removal of the investment tax credit. That has driven up energy costs. And so we have to be honest with people that a lot of the drivers of the costs that we are seeing are largely macroeconomic features that the federal government has really driven into existence, including issues around inflation. And so we are trying to respond. We are trying to do the things that we can with the tools we have at the state level, like grocery prices and looking at surveillance pricing and the way that it happens with online pricing and personalized data being utilized and misused to extract the most amount of dollars out. We're trying to bulk up the Consumer Protection Division to see where price gouging is occurring or where there are scams happening like cryptocurrency and where people are trying to put money in just to make a buck. We're trying to tamp down on those abuses. And we're doing what we can in the energy market to provide relief where it's feasible. I wish we could do more. It is very difficult to see how to provide drastically more relief without a change at the federal level. That is the biggest cost driver that we're seeing here in the state of Maryland is because of these federal policies. And we're in a place of sadly having to react, which is never a place we want to be, but is the reality for states when the federal government is as unpredictable as it's been.
Are you disappointed with how little you have been able to do?
No, I'm not disappointed. I think that we've maximized the tools that we have available to us to provide the relief where we can. We've had some really difficult choices of you take developmentally disabled and the challenges that we've had to make sure that we are providing for the most vulnerable amongst us. Sure, we could have cut another $150 million out of the developmentally disabled budget. It would have meant that the most vulnerable people in Maryland don't have the services that they need to just function in life. And so those are the tough choices. We could cut from there and provide a little, a few dollars here and there for relief. And so we have to make a very hard balance. And that's what this job is about balancing the realities of the needs with the desires to do more where we can. I feel very good with where we are, assuming that we land here in 2 weeks at the end of session.
Is cutting Empower kind of one of those tough choices as well? And can you talk about the Senate version of the Empower cuts?
Yeah, but cutting Empower is, and I wouldn't say it's a cut to Empower, it's an adjustment. It's a temporary review and pause of the program to ensure that it's getting the best value. Empower has been very helpful over time to reduce demand. It's our only real investment for reducing people's usage of electricity. We've done a lot of the low-hanging fruit. The question is, in its next phase, as we focus on greenhouse gases, are we getting the best reductions for the most affordable costs? And so I think now is the right time to be making that decision. Before we see escalating costs related to the reduction of greenhouse gases, we've got to make sure that we can do it affordably. And so now is that period where we just have to be more judicious and really protect ratepayers as much as possible.
Is there really like an evaluation of Empower? I mean, I've just seen a pause on the greenhouse gases and kind of letting the utilities shrink their programs down. I mean,
well, part of the shrinking of the program is about cost effectiveness, and so what the shrinking of the program will be based on which features and functions are the most cost effective, and so I think that is inherently going to be a review of only providing for the services that are deemed cost effective.
Mr. President, on the OIG access bill, some are saying that because the mayor of Baltimore City is against this bill that would exempt the inspectors general from the MPIA, that's the reason why the bill itself isn't moving forward. Is that true?
I can categorically say that is not the case. Certainly I've talked to the mayor. I work very closely with the mayor on a number of different fronts. And he and I have talked about this issue in particular. And I think we're in agreement that it's about what is the right balanced approach. And it's not just the mayor. I think it's other county executives and other local governments as well. When I look at what we do in the legislature, we don't have open access to all information that the governor is working with on any given day. And frankly, we shouldn't. We don't need it on an everyday basis, every piece of data that's happening in any executive agency. We need it for when we're doing reviews. We need to do audits when there are questions or whistleblowers or issues that come up. Then there is focused attention and investigations, and there are categorical, purposeful, prioritized questions. And I think that's what we're trying to figure out for on the Inspector General side is what is the right framework? I think that we'll get somewhere this year that lays out at least for a temporary basis, some categorization. In fact, I just had a conversation with NCSL yesterday, asking for a 50-state review of how other states handle data sharing with inspector generals. And so I look forward to utilizing that. We have 2 weeks. I don't think we'll get to perfect, but I'm hoping that we can get to something before we get out that sets the right criteria. It's not a blanket exemption, but it is an appropriate balanced approach of what data is regularly available versus what's on request and what's on potentially subpoena or the most highly confidential data, what can be accessed only through specific court order.
I know before you said, full exemption is not likely, and that's what you're talking about here, given the fact that we do only have 2 weeks left. When will we start to see some of those details?
Hopefully, in the next, there's a lot going on in the next 2 weeks, right? This issue sort of emerged in the middle of session unexpectedly. This was not sort of on our radars when we first came in. And so there's been a lot of attention being paid and tried to get data moving to get a best sense of what the best framework could be. I'm hoping in the next 2 weeks we get there. I don't want to put a date on it yet because there's just a lot flying.
Mr. President, you mentioned earlier that there was a pre-conference on the budget. They're going to meet later today to kind of iron out some differences. Would you highlight, please, how close are they and what are those differences?
Yeah, I mean, the differences are really, they are very, very minor. I don't think that there's anything that's, we're talking a couple $1 million in programs here and there. There's sort of some last minute changes. I think I saw some reporting around the $40 million around developmentally disabled of deficiency appropriation above projections. And so figuring out exactly how to navigate that additional $40 million cost that no one saw necessarily coming. There's a lot of budget language for specific programs, things about how we should be looking at MDE, programs to help improve agencies that are more policy-driven differences and ironing out differences there. And then when we look at the PAYGO budget and capital, we have not passed the capital budget, and PAYGO and capital go together, and so we have to match the two sides. So they're really, it's largely technical. There are not huge substantive major issues out there. I've not heard a result, but we're looking at some of the economic development programs that we've worked through, and I know there had been some differences on how we approach those in the House and the Senate. And I have to get a report after this about how that conversation went. But these are really tiny in the scope of things.
And under the category of, this is yesterday's news, another attempt to redistrict. What are your thoughts? Because your office told us yesterday it's a non-starter. But what are your thoughts on how the attempt was made?
I think it's yesterday's news. I think you said it well.
Is Senator Kagan's bill dead?
I don't foresee us moving forward on it.
Mr. President, the Community Trust Act also did not make it through in either chamber, and you had talked a little bit before about where the state's role is in regulating those informal agreements that are not 287G programs. So it looks like that might not make it this session, but I'm curious, do you see the state having any type of role in regulating policies between ICE and local law enforcement? I
think we're going to be monitoring this very closely. I'm very concerned about what we're seeing and hearing out of the voices of some of the elected sheriffs in some of the other counties. I'm pleased to see in my own city that they're moving forward with some of these enhanced protections and codifying some of the policies that were put in place at the local level. I think that that's probably going to be the most efficient way of getting at this is in each local jurisdiction. I know there are very passionate advocates that are monitoring it very closely, and I think it is likely that local by local is how this is going to be approached. I know that the governor's office is very honed in on focusing on how different whether there are differences in application after the 287G agreements go away. And so this is something that we're going to be monitoring very, very closely. We also have the budget restriction to make sure that there's not sort of fictitious end arounds to get around the 287G agreements. And so that's where the Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention will be able to be monitoring where things are, that there's not something, just a certification done, but then in actual practice, we're seeing that the agreements are in fact not being used. And the important thing is why? Why? We don't need state and local dollars enforcing federal law. That's the key point here. And I think we are in a tight budget climate, and what we don't need are local officials spending their precious and time and energy not focused on everyday violent crime, and instead focused on trying to do the job that the federal government has been failing to do well. And so this is why it matters. It's not just an immigration issue. It is about we do not want in the state of Maryland, state and local officials being extensions of ICE. And so that's why we will continue to monitor it vigorously and make sure that the spirit of the law is being upheld.
Mr. President, going back to redistricting, one of your objections early on and consistently has been sort of the legal jeopardy that a mid-cycle redistricting map would pose, specifically sort of built around the Battaglia decision, which is not precedential. There are those who say that the attempt on the Kagan bill was to resolve that Battaglia decision issue. Between now and the next redistricting, the next census cycle and redistricting that goes with that, is there a path for the legislature to attempt to resolve the Battaglia decision, and what does that look like?
I think we'll have to see. I think it's too hard to say. You know, in the next 2 weeks, we have to focus on the issues that we know are nearing the finish line. This one, I think, has been literally litigated, and so we're gonna have to navigate it in the future.
Doesn't that make it then sort of de facto presidential if you guys are treating it that way?
I mean, I think there's a lot of years between now and 2031, so.
Going back to the budget, Mr. President, I know you said, you know, this is one of the earliest years, if not the earliest, that it's going to reach the governor's desk. Are you anticipating any sort of action from him that would leave you guys time to perhaps take a veto override?
I mean, look, we're presenting the budget early and in preparation for anything that could occur. This is an uncertain time. We've been in close communication with the governor's office. We don't anticipate any issues. We don't anticipate any reason that the governor would utilize a line item veto, but we also are going to be prepared just to make sure we have the time to address it should something emerge.
We're gonna do one more, guys. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, let's go O's, right? Great game yesterday. All right. Thank you.